Welcome to Thought Leaders Live, where we talk with thought leaders in business, life, and all points in between. Excited for today's topic, one that's near and dear to my own heart. We're going to be talking with Sarah Elkins about how to connect with anyone through your personal stories. Sarah is a workplace communication trainer, keynote speaker, professional storyteller, and we were catching up before the show. Really fascinating background. So, Sarah, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for the invitation, Greg. I loved seeing that invitation in my inbox on LinkedIn.
Oh, okay. Wow. Glad to hear that. And really excited again to get into this topic. So, before we get into the need for personal stories, and why don't we start out with a little bit about your background and what you're doing these days and how personal stories is integrated into your approach?
Well, thanks for asking. It's been such a journey. I tend to get bored really easily, so I've tried a lot of different things in my career. I finally heard the term um, generalist probably 10 years ago, and I was like, oh, that so fits me.
You're the anti-niche
I am
person.
the anti-niche person when it comes to my experiences.
Yeah.
When it comes to pulling everything together to make something of value, something meaningful, I'm really an expert about that.
Okay.
And one of the things that I love to tell this story that when I was blogging, I was in a job that I didn't love. I liked what I was doing, but it was not a great environment for me. I was a compliance officer for a federal grant, and I don't even like rules. So wasn't a
The
great fit.
torture.
It was torture. But I did a good job of it because I realized that if I could build relationships with our subgrantees, then they would be compliant because they wanted to, not because they had to.
Okay.
And what I learned about building relationships in that time was that if I shared some aspect of my life in a personal way, that it would unlock that relationship with the person that I was talking to, whether it was on the phone, in the grocery store, in my cubicle with another colleague, whatever. And it could be something, it could be a 30-second story. It could be, oh my gosh, I love my dog, but he woke me up at 4 in the morning with that throw up sound. And what do you do with that, right? You know,
Yeah.
you have to wake up. Do you go back to sleep? Can you go back to sleep? It could take 30 seconds and they are laughing and they're immediately telling you a story about their own pet or about their kid or about something that happened when they were a kid with their pet. And it creates an immediate connection. So I remember learning that as a compliance officer and then taking it with me into the job that I had next, which was the first public information officer for my city. They'd never had one before. And I was able to connect with the media that were stopping by. I learned how to tell a very brief story so they couldn't take it out of context,
Mhm.
especially in video. And I learned again that facilitating a relationship, which was my job, to facilitate the relationship between our city and our community, that sharing a personal story or helping one of my colleagues share a personal story would help in two ways. One is that it would remind people that they're human, that this elected official or this public works person, the streets maintenance division person, is a real human and their neighbor. So the hostility that sometimes we experience in government agencies could be reduced a little bit if the community understood that this person who is trying to plow the roads in the middle of winter at 4 in the morning is their neighbor with their own pet or their own kid that goes to school with your kids. It created a different kind of relationship there. And by sharing these stories, we were demonstrating what they do and how much they care about their community.
So it's a great experience. Then you go out after working you're in Helena, Montana. You told me before we got on,
Mhm.
and you had this position, and then you decided to go out on your own. Tell me about what you're doing now. as a self-employed consultant?
Sure. I mentioned, Greg, that I have a few strengths that are, well, I'll just tell you, I use Gallup's Strengths Finder Clifton Strengths tool to do workplace communication training and improvement with teams and individuals. And two of my top talents are adaptability and activator, which means I switch gears very quickly and I love change. I live in transition where most people like to live in contentedness.
Right.
And that's never been my thing. So I've always had a side hustle my entire life. I've never had just one job. So as I was finishing up the job that I didn't love as a compliance officer, I loved people I worked with. I loved the impact I could have, but wasn't a great fit for me strengths wise. I don't have the executing domain, which means I don't have the discipline and process and procedure and maintenance mode. I can build something, but then once it's in maintenance mode, I like to hand it off to somebody who will maintain it and improve on the processes to make it sustainable. So when I left that job, I was trying to figure out what I do really well because having had a job that I did well, but it didn't light me up, my confidence was starting to tank. Like
Mm,
what am I actually good at?
right.
And what I realized is that I love public speaking, I love training, I love coaching, I love writing, I love performance, and I wrote all those things down. And throughout my time, toward the end of that compliance officer role, and then into the years that I was the public information officer, I started incorporating and integrating those things into my work. So I would offer to do trainings. I did customer service workshops for the staff of the city with different departments. Um, I was the face of the city of Helena periodically. I would give media interviews. I would go to events with the mayor and the city manager, and I would represent. So people started to see me in those roles training, development, public speaking, writing. It was all the things I wanted to do. So I was building my portfolio of what I would do later on. I was building my experience and I was building my reputation at the same time. And honestly, I don't think that it was consciously intentional. It just, this is the way that it worked. These are the things I wanted to be doing. So I found ways to be doing them. And then when I finally left that job, I got certified with Gallup's StrengthsFinder tool and was able to combine this love for storytelling and coaching because this tool is so practical. And I am a highly practical person. But one of the issues every professional struggles with is how to talk about what they do well, how to craft their job so they're living in the things that light them up and they get enthusiastic about versus the activities and tasks that drain them. How do you craft your job to do that if you don't have the language to describe it? And if you're not familiar with StrengthsFinder, my saying, my top two talents are strategic and activator, they're not meaningful. But if I can tell you a story about how I produced a short film, a documentary for the city of Helena when I first started with the city. I knew nothing about the water supply or how things worked in public works, but I produced this film all about where our water comes from, our water rights, the forest and the watershed that provide our water, where it gets treated. I interviewed the people that were in charge of treating our water, the Forest Service officials, the scientists that were dealing with the watershed. As soon as I was given that job, I had a plan for how quickly I could do it, the most efficient, practical, fast way that I could do it. I surrounded myself with the right people and I just started. I didn't start collecting information first. I just had an idea and I went with it. So when I tell you that story, I'm demonstrating my strategic, my activator, my ideation. And my husband gave me this great quote. He said, "It's because your strengths are your stories." And that's how I've managed to combine StrengthsFinder and that assessment with storytelling.
Well, give, you know, Thank you for that, and I love that story. That just answers the question because, like, I remember talking to my folks, and they would always be like, my mom especially would always be like, "So what do you do again?" And that's like when I was doing just a lot of SEO and things like that in the marketing side, and um, then I would go through this lengthy explanation, and I wish I would have had your technique back then because I probably could have just told a story, but along those lines now, tell us a story, if you would, about how you are using the strengths finder and the storytelling. Give us a scenario or a story about how that plays out in action.
Sure. I'll give two because I work with individuals and I do a couple of different kinds of coaching, and I also work with teams to improve communication. So, a recent situation where I've been working with a handful of nonprofits basically since I got my certification. Every time they have a new employee, they have me onboard them, having them take the assessment. I work with them with a one to one so that they understand their natural talents. And then their supervisor can call me and we can talk through what the expectations are for their communication style. And I help them look at each other's talents and understand where the potential friction might happen and the best possible ways to communicate among them. So it's basically learning their language. So if you have somebody who is like me, who's ready to go, doesn't need a lot of information, needs to just be given an outline and what the outcome looks like, and then let them go, versus somebody who wants to be front loaded with all the information. They want everything you have. They're going to read and research and take some time before they're going to take a step. But once they get going, they're going to do it. They're going to do great.
Yeah,
So if you know in advance how your new employee needs information and what they need in terms of relationship, um, affirmation, acknowledgement, correction, once they understand each other's language, they're a lot more likely to have a successful relationship from day one.
right.
They don't have to take months and months to figure each other out. It
Yep,
happens much quicker. So I have a lot of clients that come back to me year after year with their new employees. They bring me back for periodic refreshers for lunch and learn. I'll come and do a 90-minute or a 3-hour half day workshop to refresh about StrengthsFinder. That is such rewarding work because I know people like their jobs because they have people around them who understand what they need and can live in their talents. The other way that I use these tools is I do some public speaking coaching. So I did a workshop for an executive leadership team at their retreat. They wanted something non industry specific as a break from their industry specific um, sessions that they were doing during their retreat. And
sure,
they wanted some kind of a break from the dry stuff. And they said, we think we could all benefit from doing some public speaking coaching.
sure.
So I took their strengths because they all had done the StrengthsFinder results or the assessment, and I used them so that I was customizing all the materials, and every statement or strategy or idea that I would share with each individual on that team was specific to their talents. So
Wow. You gave so how many of those did you have to create or how, I don't get too into the weeds on how you executed that, but that sounds like a lot of work and customization.
I do a lot of preparation for everything that I do because I want to make sure that they're getting the most out of it. This tool can be so useful, can help you in your personal life and your professional life. It
Right.
has helped in my 30-year relationship with my spouse.
Sure.
We uncovered patterns of conflict based on how our brains work. It's really it can be so useful. I want to make sure that everyone who has access to it gets some benefit from it because it can really improve people's lives and their relationships. So in this case, there were a dozen people in the room, and I'll give you an example. One of them is an information gatherer. She is not somebody who can just off the cuff start speaking in a meeting. She's not going to use her voice. She's not going to share her amazing ideas unless she knows what's expected of her in advance. So we talked about that. And I said, okay, when you're preparing to speak in front of a group, this is what you need to prepare. But when you're preparing, all you need is to know who's in the audience because you have this natural ability to read people and you know what they need from you very quickly. Um, and and what you need to prepare is going to look a little different. So there are some standard ideas about breathing and posture and body language and reading your audience. There's some standard stuff there. But as far as making somebody more comfortable to speak in front of a group, their preparation is going to look different based on their talents.
Wow.
And that's what I brought to it. And I also have some individual coaching clients, one that just did a TEDx talk, and another one who was doing this a lecture for a group at a university that she was nervous about. She really wanted to nail it. So we uncovered her strengths first. And one of the best things about that is that I knew, based on her talents, the level of vulnerability that made sense for her in terms of sharing personal stories.
Ooh, that's interesting. Let's dive into that a little bit. And I just one note on the whole strengths thing. I mean, this has been around. This is nothing new. Like Peter Drucker, when he wrote The Effective Executive, that was
Mm-hmm.
his main thesis was play to their strengths. My wife's a parent coach. She just talks about first thing she tries to do is find out the parents' strengths, the kids' strengths. So it's like it's nothing new, but I think we go into a lot of these relationships and you have expectations that you want or something you want and the way you want them to a person to act, and you kind of get this mindset like you're going to mold them instead, and that is just like that is the path of most resistance has been my experience, whereas what you're saying makes total sense. Like why fight, why it's the path of, like I said, path of most resistance. So I really like the whole idea. Tell me a little bit about that vulnerability aspect, and when are you sharing too much?
That is such an important question. I always start with intention. I always start with intention. And then I discern my audience. So I just recently had my first experience on the TEDx stage on
Oh,
November 3rd of
congratulations.
2025. Thank you. The video went live about, gosh, it must be about 6 weeks ago now.
Okay.
And I'm very proud of this accomplishment. It was very hard work. And I surprised myself with the level of discipline I put into making it good and making it so that I would be satisfied when I walked off that stage. So I'm
Sure.
really proud of this accomplishment. What I did is I created a framework and I called it the ideal way to connect with people. So I broke out the word ideal, and the first thing is intention. So when you're talking about a level of vulnerability, you have to decide how you're going to serve your audience. What do you want them to know about you? What do you want them to think or do or feel at the end of sharing your story? If you want to make people really uncomfortable, which sometimes that's an important aspect of sharing a story. I would make you really uncomfortable. I need you to think about this in a different way. And if you're comfortable, it's not going to trigger any inspiration. Even an edge of feeling defensive sometimes can be an intention. I want this person to feel just the edge of defensiveness in order to open to the possibility of changing your perspective, not changing your mind. I don't believe in trying to change people's minds, but I do believe in opening perspectives. So, starting with that intention, if you want to make people really, really uncomfortable, share something really, really vulnerable. If you want to make people feel like they're connected to you, you want them to know something about you. So, for instance, I want you to know I'm a really good cook. and that I love to feed people, nurture them at my dining room table. So I might tell a story about the pizza oven my husband installed in our backyard. And I told this story at a Disrupt HR talk, which is really fun. But it's a 30-second story. And it's my husband bought this um, wood burning pizza oven, and it took me quite a few tries to make the crust perfect. But it ends up taking an overnight plan to make the crust in advance. And I am not a great planner for that kind of thing. But when it comes to pizza crust, that's what makes the difference. So it's a slow rising to let the gluten chains form slowly. So I make the dough at night. I put it in the refrigerator overnight to rise, which is highly unusual for bread. And I will never forget the first time that it came out right. And I had laid out the dough and I browned some butter, put some chopped up sage from my garden in it, just a little, because sage can be overwhelming. Just a little sage in the garden in the brown butter, topped it with some goat cheese, little chev, and some capers. And it came out of the oven and the edges were bubbled up and just crispy. And you bit into it and it had that perfect crisp on the outside and elasticy texture on the inside.
Sarah, wait, don't do this to me before lunch. Come on, we got 4 minutes to go here.
That's the thing, though. I don't need to tell you I'm a really good cook.
Yeah.
I don't need to tell you that. Is it vulnerable? Not so much. But if I want to demonstrate being a good cook and caring about what I create and using the ingredients that matter, that's a 30-second story I can share.
I think what you did there too is you tapped into an emotion. Um, and like you said, you could go for the whole range of emotions. What's your intention? And in the show description, we talked a little bit about neuroscience behind it and
Mhm.
in the neuroscience. And I don't know if you've read Neuroselling, but that's a great book where he talks about trying to tell a story to make that emotional connection first before you go into the sale, because then people aren't going to have their guard up as much and aren't going to be defensive.
Mhm.
Does that kind of work as well with the storytelling in your approach?
It does, for sure. Again, I'm going to come back to this idea that storytelling doesn't have to be about persuasion. I mean, I get it. It's a marketing tool. And unfortunately, it works really well. And there are times when people abuse it because it connects us neurologically, physiologically. Our heartbeats can start to fluctuate in sync. So even our heartbeats start to connect when we're telling a story or when we're sharing or listening to a story. Our brains start to connect. We release oxytocin and the brain chemical responsible for feelings of empathy and compassion. We can release those. So it's a powerful tool. And I think it's really important to know that in advance and to know that your intention is to connect, not to persuade, not to change someone's mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if your intention is to connect, then sharing um, that level of vulnerability. I can share a story about my kid that came home from college one time, and I was trying to find a picture in my phone as we were hiking, and because I wanted to show him a picture from the view that we were about to see that I had taken just a few days before. And I'm like, look how different this is. And I'm scrolling through my photos on my phone, and he's looking down over my shoulder because, of course, he's taller than I am. And he's looking down over my shoulder, and he says, "Mom, I see a lot of pictures of the dog." I'm like, "Well, yeah." And he goes, "You have kids too."
Yeah.
So I can tell that story, and that level of vulnerability is going to connect with somebody, whether they have a kid or not.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. Well, Sarah, we you touched on the I. Can you take us through the rest of the ideal framework? We've got about 5, 6 minutes left. Can you take us through the rest of it? Do we have enough
Sure,
time?
of course, absolutely. And I'm working on a companion book to go with the TEDx. So
Awesome.
it will walk people through that ideal framework and help people to feel more comfortable talking to strangers. Because that's basically what I'm asking you to do to
Yeah.
reduce the isolation and division and loneliness that's happening in our country, well, globally right now. I'm
Sure.
asking you to talk to strangers and share a brief story to make them laugh or to connect with them. So the ideal framework starts with that intention. What do I want people to know about me? What do I want them to feel? And then the D is for discernment, discerning your audience. What story might help build their trust? Who is this person in front of me? What do we have in common? And what are our visible and beautiful differences? Because I love knowing different types of people, their different backgrounds, their different languages, the different foods that they eat. I love that stuff. So discerning both the beauty of our differences and the beauty of what we have in common. Finding out from them just by a quick observation, who is this person? What matters to them? What story might help build their trust? And then you get into the engagement part. Tell the story. Maybe start with a short description. We installed this wood burning pizza oven in our backyard, and it has that stainless steel cover. It's nice and shiny, and the original fire bricks at the bottom so that the pizza gets crispy. I described what the pizza looked like, right? So you start with a little description so the person's right there with you. You talk about the obstacle and then what happened at the end. What was the solution? What were the feelings that you experienced at the end of the story? So engage them with the story. And then the AL in ideal is to actively listen. This is a key part of being a good storyteller. If you are sharing a story to connect with a person or to connect with an audience, actively listening is the next step, because what you've just done is unlocked their story. So now you have to actually listen to it. Maybe ask some questions to dive a little deeper. Sometimes I pick up on things during my podcast. Your stories don't define you, how you tell them will. I'll pick up on something that a person said in kind of a throwaway comment and say, oh, wait a minute, let's go back to that. I think there's more to this. So
Right.
uncover things that the person might not have noticed. That's the AL and ideal.
Yeah. Nice. I like that. I like that kind of diving into their story as well. I think there's this kind of quid pro quo that happens very organically when you tell a story or you open up and are vulnerable in some way, or just share something about yourself. It almost invites somebody in to reciprocate and tell something about themselves. You find that that happens often?
Yes, that's actually in the beginning of my TEDx. I ask people to raise their hand if sometimes they have a hard time listening to someone else's story because something the person said reminded them of their own experience.
Oh, sure.
And then the next part of the TEDx is when I say, and you can watch the video later on, is, well, that's great. What if you used that with intention? What if you told a story with the intention of unlocking the story for the other person?
Oh,
So when I'm doing a keynote and I share a story, I know that the people in the audience are thinking of their own related experience.
right.
I'm doing that intentionally.
Yeah.
And then I might ask them to share, which makes it a far more engaging, interactive experience. And then everyone in the room learns something about this one person. When you think about the signals you're sending through every story you share, people are learning about something about who you are, what matters to you. It's 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 beautiful.
It's beautiful and it's super powerful. And I mean, I think that of all of life experiences and things I remember and details I remember, it's really the experiences in my life that I remember most. And I think what you're doing is you're creating these experiences and having people share them. And then that once you hear somebody else's experience, you form that impression of them and that idea of them and their that identity. And to your point, if it's their strengths or it's something that they are passionate about, it's that's a very positive impression that they get.
Absolutely. You develop cheerleaders and advocates in the work that you're doing.
It's fantastic. Well, Sarah, really enjoyed having you on, diving deep into this. If somebody wants to work with you, learn more about you, follow you, so when that book comes out, they can check it out, how do they do that?
Well, definitely visit my website. You can get to all of my links through my website, including my podcast. You can buy my first book through my website or Amazon or wherever. It's called Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. And I love engaging on LinkedIn. It's my favorite platform. I'm very particular about how I interact on that platform. So please engage with me. Don't try to sell me anything there because I'm there to get to know people. So please connect with me on LinkedIn.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. I really enjoyed it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for another edition of Thought Leaders Live. We'll catch you on the next one.